Wake up, it's the Nolan Carr Night Show starring Nolan. I join Nolan as guest this week, Gary Griffin, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. And with me, ladies and gentlemen, is a amazing person, amazing musician. You may have seen him on television, but you certainly know him from on stage. He currently plays with the Brian Wilson Band. He's played with the Beach Boys. He's played with Jan Dean, the Surf City All-Stars. He's the one and only Gary Griffin. Gary, how are you doing today?
Why, fine, Nolan. Thank you. I'm good.
Well,
I'm in Ohio, and it's snowing here today. It's rather cold.
It is cold here. Yesterday was 16 degrees, so it wasn't the most enjoyable thing walking outside.
Well, you're colder than we are. We're in about the upper 20s, but the snow is coming down. And having spent the last 40 years in California, I'm still not used to this yet.
I'm sure you're not. I mentioned this because I had Bobby on a few weeks ago, and he obviously lives in Southern California, and my grandparents used to have a place in Vero Beach, Florida. So when they'd go down for the winter time, and they'd always brag about how warm it is down there during this time of year, and I'd always want to wring their necks out because it's cold as heck here. As I mentioned, we got going, catching up on how life's going right now, and we kind of talked about concerts and whatnot. And obviously, the last 2 years have been interesting. They've been somewhat peculiar, and in your situation as a musician, it's definitely been more interesting. So, how has it been for you, saying that you played right before the pandemic happened, and then now as we're still sort of in it?
Oh, it's frustrating, but it's something we got to put up with. Yeah, we haven't really played. We played in October. We did a bunch of dates this past October, but prior to that, we hadn't played since March of 2020, I believe. Long time off. So by the time we got back together, it was such a thrill, so much fun to get together with the guys and get and play. We had a wonderful time. The band sounded great. It's like everybody was on point. Everybody said, we're going to do this as good as we can do it. Because I don't know how often we're going to get to do it again.
Yeah.
So we're really looking forward to getting back to work in a few months.
Well, it was exciting to see when I saw that yourself and the band were playing Chicago. I was like, how did this happen? But it's definitely an exciting thing for you. From your perspective, did you see anyone or think that or I don't want to say think, but see anyone that was sort of reserved in terms of thinking if they could still go out and perform as well as you guys did before the pandemic started, or was it still just naturally, we're going to do great?
Now say it again. What? I don't follow you.
So obviously 2 years is a long time between the previous tour and then this. Was there anyone that you saw, or maybe they just had all the same opinion of, are we going to be able to still play well, or just, we're still going to be able to play in a good
cool thing was when all the guys in the band, we're all, we were ready to go. Yeah. Brian fortunately had spent a lot of that time taking some really good vocal coaching, some really intense vocal training to keep his voice in shape. And he came back, and we saw him in October, and he was singing better than he has in years. It was great. It was so inspiring. I mean, because we all should have been doing that, but he did it. He was singing strong. It was really cool.
Well, that definitely, and I recognize that. I paid attention on social media and following his pages and whatnot. And that definitely was something, even on a certain song like his classic Surfer Girl, his very first one at 19, sing that song. That's a very high song that he sung when he was younger, but to still be able to hold on to that song and still perform it as well as he did at his age is definitely amazing. That it was that perseverance through through this whole time. We talked about earlier before we got going here, the past few weeks with the playoffs and the Bengals and the stuff. So besides, how crazy has it gotten now, even during the pandemic, with what just happened this past weekend?
Oh, it's so cool. Well, I'm living back in and around Cincinnati, which is my hometown. We came back. My wife and I came back here it's already almost 3 years. I can't believe it's been this long already. And this city is just nuts for the Bengals because they haven't been good in years. And now they're really good. And they, fought their way through the first two playoff games. And now they play the Chiefs on Sunday. And who knows? We beat them about a month ago. So maybe we can do it again. And it's great.
Beat the Raiders, and that was a last second play as well. So who knows?
Every game. Every game's been like that. It's been great football.
The Chiefs almost lost, so who knows? I'm rooting for you. I'm not a huge, although Mahomes is a good quarterback. I'm not too on top of him this year. Speaking of growing up in Ohio, I sort of want to this is how I want to dive in. you grew up in Ohio, and
Yep.
what was your relationship with music like, not only in the sense of listening to it, but also possibly doing it as a career when you got older?
Well, I started taking piano lessons on my 5th birthday. That was my birthday present from my Aunt Fran, a year's worth of piano lessons. And I remember saying, well, okay, I guess I'll do that. So I did it, and I took to it right away. I loved it from the minute I started playing piano at age 5. I loved it. And then once I started hearing rock and roll on the radio in the early 60s and hearing the Beach Boys, I was just enthralled by it. That's all I ever wanted to do, was play music like that. And, I had no idea that it would actually lead to something, but it did. I got lucky. I was blessed.
Grant, seeing as though Ohio's not near the Pacific Ocean nor the Atlantic Ocean, for you, what was
Right.
that pull for the Beach Boys type of music, seeing as, Pacific Ocean wasn't near you?
Like you said, it's just like no lifestyle. Nothing could have been farther from the way I was growing up. And so it was just fascinating to hear these songs about the beach and the girls and the cars. We had none of that.
Yeah.
The girls, we had some girls, but they didn't have anything to do with me, believe me. I was a little nerd, still am. But it was just fascinating. So quite alluring. So when I finally got to go to California, first time I went to California was in 73. I just loved it. I loved it. Then I moved out there in 77.
Now, Matt and Greg Coffee, who you were on their show with, talked about how when, I think it was at least Matt, I don't know about Greg, but Matt talked about how, and I know Darren has mentioned this in other interviews he's done, where he got made fun of for listening to the Beach Boys music and where he grew up. What was your love for the Beach Boys across the board with other kids your age where you grew up in Ohio, or was it, a rare thing?
Well, for the first few years of the Beach Boys' success, they were very cool. They were very hip. And then things kind of turned in 67 or 68.
Yeah.
Suddenly they weren't all that cool. They were to me, and they were to a lot of people, but we kind of had to keep it on the down low because it wasn't all that hip. But they really turned around, and now their music obviously is just persevered and is so well loved. Fortunately, consequently, I have a career.
Especially the last few years where they've released stuff since or at least Brian specifically, the last few years after the 50th anniversary tour, which I want to get to eventually, that you had a part in. I marvel at the fact, Gary, and this is me being all honest, how you were hell bent on being part of the Beach Boys and playing with them from an early age, and then you ended up being with the Beach Boys. How all in were you on that sort of goal when you were younger? Because that's a big gamble to dream that high to be with that group.
Yeah, I was out of my mind. That's just what I wanted to do. And so I would go to when I was still living here in Cincinnati, just, college age, high school, college age, I would go to any concert they did in the area and kind of do everything I could to get in their face, to meet them and hang and to be a pest, basically. And then I don't know how, I don't know why, but it connected. And Mike Love called me out of the blue. Mike Love and Ron Altbach called me out of the blue in 1977 and said, "We need a keyboard player. Are you interested?" I said, "What'd you say?" I said, "Of course I'm interested." And that's how it happened. They just, I don't know. I had sent them tapes of the band I was in at the time, so I guess they could hear that I wasn't awful, and that's good enough to be considered. So.
Well, that is definitely something I want to get to in a little bit. But I first want to ask you. There's an interview you had done a few years ago for Soapbox back in Ohio. I think it must have been around the time you moved back to Ohio, and I talked about how you were playing in a band called Chillingsworth during the hippie movement. For you, what was that? I mean, obviously we know about, the Grateful Dead and that whole thing out in California, maybe in New York. For you growing up and being part of that movement, playing in that movement in Ohio, what was that like?
Well, we weren't all that hip or cool. We did a lot of very kind of middle of the road stuff, 4-part harmonies. It was just kind of clean, beautiful stuff. And so we weren't like cool by those terms, but it was a great band with my good friends, and we had a wonderful time. But I don't know, we just
An experience.
great experience.
Well, I
Yep.
I had asked Bobby this, and he has maybe a little different story. Seeing as two of his sisters had sung back or had been backup singers for I Continue Turner early on. But I asked him this question of, some parents, when their kids are growing up, they have a certain idea or direction that they want their kids to go into in terms of career and what job they want, where they want to go to school. How supportive and how invested were your parents in your, musical career starting out? Were they big for it, or was it something that they were like, oh, this is just going to be a phase?
No, they were very supportive, very much so. Especially my mom. She loved to play the piano herself. She loved music, and she always wanted to be a musician, but she never got that opportunity. So when I started doing it, she was very, very supportive. And then when I started with the Beach Boys, they were just thrilled. And then they didn't know what it would, they didn't know like what kind of a career it would be, what kind of money I could make. But that was the only the only address I had for the Beach Boys office to send checks to was their house. So the checks went there, and they'd open the checks and go, "Hey, this is pretty nice. You're making some money here. This is all right." So
they were thinking their baby boy Gary's making a smart move.
Yeah, well, at first I thought, oh, what's he going to make, a couple dollars here and there? And not that it was a lot, wasn't all that much money, but it was certainly more than they ever anticipated, and me too. So that was great. They were very supportive. They always were.
How long after that group Chillingsworth did you how long was that experience before you started working with Mike Love in '73? Was there a big period in between both groups, or was it
3 years? Chillingsworth, I was doing other groups here in town, and I was actually working as a recording engineer in a studio here. So that was a great experience.
When you're now in that situation, that's a big, I would think, a big adjustment going from a band from your hometown in your area to then going to the greatest band probably of all time, the Beach Boys, especially that phase after Sunflower and those albums. How do you tell your other band members that you're with that, oh, hey, I'm leaving because I'm going to go be playing with the Beach Boys for a little bit? Is it something easy for you to say to them, or is it something that's an argument?
Easy. It was a piece of cake. I was so proud. I was so excited. And the local paper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, actually did a big feature on me going off to play with the Beach Boys. Like, local boy makes good. It was very cool. So it was a wonderful time. All my friends were very supportive. They're still very excited about what I do. It's very cool.
Now, although it was maybe only a few recordings that you had done with Mike Love during that time before you joined them on that tour in '77, was there any worry in terms of when you went out to California to go do those recordings with Mike that what would happen next after in your career, or was it something like these recordings are going to help me move forward up into my career that I wanted to do?
I didn't know where it was going to lead to. I just didn't know. I thought, well, it's all great. Something's good to happen. So, and then when that started, then I did move to California permanently. And I started meeting a lot of people and working with a lot of different people. So things kind of steamrolled and just kept going, snowballed. And I was very fortunate. I lived out there, as I said, 41 years, and I never didn't work. It was great. I mean, it was wonderful.
When you were with Mike, at one point, or if you at all, did you think that you'd be playing with the Beach Boys after that? Was it after doing those recordings, you're like, I'm going to be playing with them? Or is it, if that happens, but I'm moving on to the next thing?
Well, I wound up playing with them off and on for years, just in and out of the group. And then, as we all know, they kind of splintered off into different entities. And I worked with different formations of them. And of course, it's quite a few years with Jan and Dean too, which was kind of like the minor league, the minor league Beach Boys.
I don't know. I think Jan and Dean was preceded the Beach Boys, if my
they did,
correct. So if anything, the Beach Boys were at one point were the minor league for Jan and Dean.
Yes, they were.
And then they superseded them as the Beatles did to the Beach Boys early on. When you when you moved to LA, was it hard for you to transition to that sort of lifestyle, or was it something that you just naturally got to since you had never
It was
experienced
pretty
it?
easy, actually, basically because I was busy, I was working, and I already had a lot of friends out there. So it was pretty smooth transition. Yeah, no problem.
77, you joined the Beach Boys for that tour. What
Yep.
was that? What was that like leading up to that phone call? Could you sense that something was going to happen, or was it just, they
No.
call you out of the blue?
That was out of the blue, completely out of the blue. I had been in touch with Mike off and on for the previous 3, 4, 5 years, just as a pest. Hey, what's going on? You need a keyboard player? You need somebody? Thinking, well, this is it. I'm a complete out of my mind for doing this, but I might as well bother him. I might as well call anyway.
Yeah.
And then it paid off. So no, that call came out of the blue. It was really, wow, what? Who's this?
At that point, when you joined them for that tour, did you have any idea how long you were going to stay with them, and was that sort of the same amount that you expected to play with them when you were a kid, or was it just whatever happens?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know I didn't know how it was going to be. I didn't know what to expect. They were it wasn't a wonderful time for them. They were kind of splintered a bit. There wasn't a lot of unity.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So all of us were kind of on the firing line. Nobody knew what was going to happen. So, but it was still fun.
How does that work in terms of how long you're going to be there when you join them in the capacity that you were? Is there like, hey, you're going to be with us for this amount of time and then that's it? Or is it just however long the situation is?
Yeah. He had no idea. Had no idea what it was going to lead to.
When you're with them at that point, I mean, obviously, growing up, you listen to the music, you grew up with Jan Dean and Dick Dale and all these other Beach Boy-esque musicians, as well as other rock and roll. When you're joining with them, and maybe it's the same case for other guys who've been with them, is there still a love for that music when you're playing with them, or is it now more of a professional appreciation for the music instead of, a boyhood fandom?
Oh, I'd have to say that I have never lost one iota of affection for this music. It doesn't matter how many times I play these songs, I still marvel at how cool they are, how good they are. No, I'm still thrilled to play it. I really am.
At that point, obviously, you're playing with Brian nowadays, and you've played with Mike in that group as well. Another point as well. How do you stay in that situation? Obviously, you're a young guy joining a tour with a lot of seasoned musicians. How do you stay professional in that situation? Because I've always been curious in that when you join a group like this and you're with them and you have to, play, but also make sure you're staying on your game, or else you're going to get that Carl Wilson stare and get kicked out.
You know about the Carl Wilson stare?
I've heard Bobby mention it, and he told me about it, and I know about it. But how do you deal with that when you're with the group at that young age?
You just have to have confidence in what you're doing. You figure, well, I'm doing as best as I can, and if there's something else I can do, tell me about it. That's what I told Carl that once. He gave me the stink eye on stage. And how did it go then? Yeah, he turned around and gave me the look. And afterwards, after the show backstage, I said, Carl, when you do that, all I know is that something's not quite right, but I have no idea what. And he goes, I know. That was it.
I want to talk about that. And you've mentioned it, them having splintered a little bit at that point. What was he like at that point? Obviously he's the leader of the group as the musical director, but also the guy who's in charge of the whole chorale there, especially when they're all splintered.
Yeah, he was great. He was all music. He was all about the music. And, he was completely on top of it, on top of his game. He was so good. Yeah, great leader, great band leader.
You joined the group around the time of the MIU album, which, all these years later, regardless of your stance, hasn't always been a fan favorite amongst some people. How do you assess that album looking back at this point in comparison to then?
I'm always been puzzled by people that don't like that album. I thought it was very cool. I thought there were some great songs, kind of easy, simple productions. I thought some of the songs were spectacular. I was very proud to play on it. I loved playing on that record.
How did you deal with living in the dormitories at the campus there? I heard it was sometimes rough.
It wasn't rough. It was just odd.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was just odd. We actually had a curfew, bedtime curfew and stuff. And we all ate meals together. And but we were so busy making music that it was, that was the main thing. Everything else was like, well, this might be an odd lifestyle, but boy, we sure love working in the studio with everybody. That was great.
During that time, obviously, that's the MIU campus is where they made that album named after
Yeah.
it. Was there any other music that was made there that wasn't for the album, maybe solo projects or anything like that, or was it just?
Oh yeah, we did a Charles Lloyd record there, Celebration, the Almost Summer soundtrack. We did some songs for Marilyn and Diane, which they called themselves American Spring at the time. We were just working all the time on different things. Yeah, a lot of stuff.
During the 77, 78 time period, Dennis, either it was already released or he was probably soon to release it. He had his Pacific Ocean Blue album that came out around that time. How aware were you of him making that around that time?
That was done just prior to me joining the band. It was completed already. I already owned that record when I started with the Beach Boys, and I thought it was great. And Dennis was so proud of that record.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, it was a great time for him.
It's unfortunate that there was never a tour of that or anything of that nature, because it is such a great album. It was one of the very first albums I have in my collection that I listened to. I forget, I must have gone for my birthday or something, that and Surf's Up, which is a sort of weird combination to get at one time. But no, a very great album that I wish, but I'm also glad in the sense that it did so well in 2008 when they I don't want to say resold it, but sent it out and it got all that success that it got. For you nowadays, obviously you work with Brian and his band. How do you compare, or how was he like back then when you were working with him in the late 70s compared to now?
He was fun. He was fun. He's very, impulsive and impatient, not impatient in a bad way, but just like, I want to do something. I want to do it right now. And he might be fixated on something he wants to do, and let's do it right now, or else, as we all know, the impulse is going to fade away and it's gone. So there are a lot of moments like that. We got to record My Sharia Moore by Stevie Wonder. We got to do it. Okay, now let's work. How's it go? By the time we figure it out, he's lost interest and just moving on to stuff. Lots of moments like that where
was he pretty there on stage in terms of physically as well as mentally?
On stage, he was a little bit inside himself, for lack of a better term, just didn't seem all that comfortable on stage. In the studio, he was. When
he was singing his probably one of his best songs, Surfer Girl, what was that like seeing him at that stage sing that?
Well, his voice was, let me think now, in 77, his voice was pretty, his voice has gone through some changes through the years. And I don't know if I really remember exactly what it was like at that point, because I've heard him so many different,
Was it close to Dennis's voice in terms of the raspiness?
Well, yeah, somewhat. He had already kind of lost that falsetto. That had kind of faded away. Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess it kind of like was a little raspy.
After you left with the group after that tour, what's next for Garry, and how do you deal with the not being with the group you wanted to be with as a kid?
You mean after I stopped touring with the Beach Boys back then?
Yeah.
Well, what happened? The next thing was Mike got that group called Celebration together to support the Almost Summer soundtrack, the movie Almost Summer. And we did some shows. We kept busy with that, and then that went right into Jan and Dean. Jan had recovered enough to be able to tour, and I had met Dean during that time, and he asked me if I wanted to play keyboard in his band, and that led to years and years of work.
After you left, how did you assess that situation when you were with the Beach Boys, even if it wasn't the length of an Ed Carter period or a Mike Kowalski period, but after you achieved that success you had with the Beach Boys?
Well, by the way, those are two of my dearest friends from this entire experience of playing with the Beach Boys, Mike and Ed. What great guys, great musicians, great guys. Yeah. So that was one of the real great things that came out of that experience, was meeting those two guys. Well,
what I realized, and what I want to I'll talk about briefly near the end, is that a lot of the guys who had played with the Beach Boys, whether it was I don't want to say major members, but like a Billy Hinchy and those sort of members of the group, have all formed their own groups that sort of give, I don't want to say tribute, but sort of play that music, which morals at the fact that how big the group is in terms of the Beach Boys and sort of
Mhm.
totally have in their music. You mentioned how you worked with Mike for Celebration and then with his other stuff, and then you joined Jan and Dean. How much of the Beach Boys in comparison to Celebration was how you got into it, Jan and Dean, or is it just how great of a musician you were?
Uh, I don't know. We have to talk to the other guys that worked with me. I don't know. Jan and Dean that was a nice transition because I love their records, and it was a great experience. Good players.
Well,
So it's very similar to the Beach Boys experience.
Sure.
It really was. Yeah.
You played with Chris Farmer in Jan and Dean, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously he played with the Beach Boys after. But what was it playing like with him early on in that band?
Oh, he was great. He was young when he started. He was even younger than I was. He was like he's like 9 years younger than I am. Oh, yeah. So yeah, he was very young when he started. He was great, sharp as could be, great ear, great player, great singer.
What was Jan like after when you had joined them after his accent that he had? Was he sort of back? I don't want to say back to his old style because I'm sure that can't happen. But what was that experience like?
Jan was he was musically sharp. He had a lot of clarity in his mind about music, but he had trouble communicating it.
Yeah.
And he was very frustrated to not be who he used to be. He used to be just on fire and produced records and controlled every aspect of their recording. So for him not to be able to have that ability to do that anymore was very frustrating. So, and that would come out, he would get, upset a lot. But he still had it up there. He still could hear it. He still knew what he was doing. He really did.
Well, I saw that. I had a friend, or I wouldn't say friend, but someone who I was close with and didn't have any issues with, who went sort of through that whole similar experience where they lose completely who they are and sort of have to rebuild. So it's definitely tough. And I had watched a few videos of Jan and Dean around that time and years afterwards into the 90s and early 2000s. And I could tell that, I'm sure it was very frustrating for him to have to deal with what he was given, but then also still want to perform. As I mentioned in the intro, and I didn't mention this exactly, but, thanks. I don't want to say thanks, but, in due part to your dear pal, Mr. John Stamos, you joined him on General Hospital, then Full House. So for you, Bobby Figueroa has made an appearance on Full House and other shows. For you, in your experience, what was that like being on television? Because I know that you were on there and you had said before it was fun and that you got some speaking roles.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it was just John. I had just met John in 82, 83, right about there when he was just starting on General Hospital, and he took off. His success just skyrocketed so quickly. And I remember meeting him and saying, "Hey, they want me to have a band on the show. You want to do it? You want to be in the band?" I said, "Okay, sure." What is the show again? General Hospital. Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Sure. Okay. And so suddenly, I'm working on, the number one daytime show in the country. And for whatever reason, they started giving me speaking lines. I had no experience at this, but I wasn't about to tell them that. They said they want to give me speaking lines. I'll do my best. So that was great. And that experience just kind of moved right over into Full House a few years later, the same type of scenario where his character had a band and he asked me to do it. And then they gave me more and more speaking lines there. And I wound up doing that and writing music for the show for 8 years. It was a great time, great experience. How do
you measure that between the Beach Boys and then Jan and Dean and that TV experience?
Well, it was a different experience, but it was still, overwhelming to be involved with something that's that popular and that successful. Full House, we had really no idea that show was going to be a success. The first few months or first year, it was like, is this going to work? Is this going to, all of a sudden it's a huge hit.
Are those moments where there's the Beach Boys or, Jan and Dean or the television stuff, another moment where you sort of have to, be excited inside, but then outside you have to, stay calm, cool, and collective and professional, or else, you're out of there.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. You have to kind of act like you belong there, act like you deserve it.
Is there now? I want to ask you this, since you were on Full House, or you were on Full House with Stamos. Obviously, Dennis is one of his biggest songs. If not his biggest song, was "Forever."
Yeah.
Stamos covers it on Full House, and they sing on Summer in Paradise.
Right.
Is there a version that you like better than the other one, or is it the same since you're so close with him?
We did. Well, obviously, we did the rock and roll version that came out on Summer in Paradise. I like that a lot. But the other day, I saw an episode of Full House, a wedding show, where I'd forgotten that I had arranged it for string quartet, and John sang the lead. And it was good.
Yeah.
Wow, I forgot about that. That was really cool. So we did. We also did a rap version of it. Did you ever hear that?
No, I've never heard
a hip hop rap version of it.
Wow.
I guess the storyline was that some record company wanted Jesse and the Rippers to, get a little cooler, get hip, and play some hip hop. So we did forever. It was horrible, but it was supposed to be horrible. It was funny, very, very funny. So we had a lot of fun with that song. Hope nobody thought we were disrespecting it in any way.
That episode, the one that you just mentioned, the wedding one. I grew up with the show. Obviously, I wasn't alive in the '90s, so in the 2000s when it was reruns, that song, then the episode of Full House where they sang Kokomo and Barbara Ann, when they had that big stadium, Barbara Ann, Kokomo, and Forever, were the three first songs I heard of the Beach Boys, and years later finally getting back into them after a little kid. Well, I obviously, when you're growing up, nowadays, I don't want to down the Beach Boys music, but you see people like Rihanna and Taylor Swift, those people who are big now, so they're sort of in the main light, so you don't really hear the Beach Boys on main radio. So I heard that song and the hits, and then finally the last few years getting back into it. But I've always had a liking towards that one. When you worked with Stamos again in the early 2000s for the TV docuseries, the Beach Boys thing, what was that process like in comparison to what you had done previously with him?
That was quite a challenge, working with actors who were not necessarily musicians. I mean, some of the guys had some musical background, but those guys did a great job at stepping up and really looking and acting like they were making music. They did a great job. And it was a thrill. I loved working on that. It was a lot of work, intense work. But I thought that in that miniseries, it's taken a few hits from the fans too, but I think certain aspects of it are really well done. Really. And a lot of it had to do with the music production on it. We did a great job. So you could quibble with the storyline here and there, but it was tough to put that together.
Now, in that situation, I don't have any sort of documentary background or film background, or any musical real background besides playing saxophone for all 6 seconds in middle school for a class credit. But no,
we need to hear that. We need a recording of that. Come on.
God, no. I never practiced once. The only practice I had was with the mouthpiece. So Mike Love laughs me continuously with that. So does Randy. Obviously it's known that Beach Boys have had, several different documentaries and movies made about them, and Brian's life has as well. How do you, in that situation with that docuseries on TV, how do you do your best in terms of making sure the story's getting out about the Beach Boys, but also making sure it's not strictly a docuseries, so you're getting people involved with it?
Well, fortunately, my job didn't have anything to do with the storyline or the writing or anything. I was just music director, so that's all I was really brought in to work on. So, but there were a lot of arguments about the story, the script, and how different characters were being portrayed, and nobody was really happy with the whole thing. That was tough. It was tough. But when you try to condense an entire career in a 4-hour miniseries, certain liberties have to be taken.
Yeah.
And can't please everybody.
And I'm sure that, making sure you're squeezing as much as you can into things is similar to the Love and Mercy documentary, or the one that just came out about Brian, Long Promised Road. Between those two, is there one that you like more than the other? I mean, I know you were in, Love and Mercy, helping Paul Dano's character,
right.
playing the songs.
Right.
Which one do you like one more than the other?
I thought Love and Mercy was fantastic. I liked the documentary too a lot. I just saw it once. I need to see it again just to because it was a lot to take in. I thought it was really good, but it's really touching seeing Brian, visiting all his old haunts. It was great.
In that situation where he was revisiting at least some of the different ones, I don't know if you remember, but when he had visited Carl's house or later into the documentary, it was very hard for him to deal with it, which definitely showed the softer side of him. If I'm not mistaken, you rejoined Mike's group briefly in the early 2000s after Mike Miros had left, according to Wikipedia.
Yeah, I did. I subbed in for a few shows. I can't remember how many. I did a little bit of stuff. Yeah.
How do you, at that point, obviously Carl had passed away in '98. How do you assess that period of the Beach Boys as well as the camp in general, where they're sort of trying to figure out their musical stuff now, going forward?
I don't know if I remember that all that clearly to be able to speak to that. I don't know. I was brought in. I don't know. I really don't know. Carl was gone, and it felt very, very different without him there. That's for sure. But they were still just trying to make it work. So no, I don't really remember that much about that.
Whether it was at that period or 2008, it was 2004. Brian had released Smile after decades of having it in the vaults. Had you listened to the bootleg sessions when it was supposed to come out, or was it a new experience for you when it came out in 2004?
No, I had heard a good bit of it prior to that, and but I didn't get to work on the Smile, the recreation of it. But I thought they did an incredible job, and it was great that music finally got released. It's fantastic. No, but I was familiar with it, a lot of it prior to that. It's great stuff.
For you, you also, as it was in the 50th anniversary album, or an album, vinyl record, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Did some engineering work on there, which you've also done with a lot of other well-known people as well. How do you assess that situation where you're not playing, but now you're making sure they sound good? Is that as stressful or more stressful than when you're playing?
It is. There is some pressure on there, because you're dealing with personalities you're not necessarily familiar with, and you're hoping they're be amenable to any criticism you might have. And most all those people were great. Anybody I had in the studio, it was a great experience, all of it. Yeah, but we did some of the Beach Boys 50th things. Some of the vocals we did out of my little studio out in the San Fernando Valley. They liked coming out there and singing. Brian used to love to come out there and sing. He'd just come out. He'd just call me up now and then and say, "I want to come over today and record."
What's that like?
Oh, okay, sure.
What's that like when you get a call from Brian Wilson to come over to your house? Because that won't happen to a whole lot of people.
I know, it's pretty surreal, isn't it? He'd call me up first thing in the morning, really early, say, "I want to come over and record such and such." He'll have some song in his head that he wants to record. Like I said earlier, he's very impulsive. "I want to do this song today." He'll call me, "I want to come over and do that." Say, "Okay, Brian, come on over at 1 o'clock. I'm available at 1 o'clock." Then he'll show up at 11 a.m. instead. Wow.
What does he do? What does he do at that situation then? Because obviously he's a man who's, like you said, has to do something at a certain time. Does he just sit and eat food at your house?
No. I accommodate him. I just move around whatever I have to do and just say, "Okay, let's get to work." And he would say, like, "Okay, I want to do. I can't think of a title. I want to do such and such a song. I want to do piano, bass, and some drums and some vocals. It'll take me 45 minutes." And I think, okay, and sure enough, he'll come out and it'll take 45 minutes. Wow. He's got it all in his head. He knows how long it's going to take him to do something. 45 minutes later, so, "Okay, thanks." And he'd take off. That's how Brian works.
In that situation, obviously, I don't want to keep saying obviously, but he's known for being a prolific engineer and producer and all that stuff. When you're doing it, you have your own idea of what you want to sound like, but then also you have his, who, he's thinking of every single tick of the song. How do you mix those together? Because obviously, I'm sure at some times it's conflicting to do one thing, but then you make sure you're doing the other.
Well, I've worked with Brian long enough, and I've been in that scenario long enough to know that I'm going to pay attention to what his suggestions are, because they might sound odd at first. Yeah. I always know it's going to be fine. This is Brian, and he knows what he's doing. And whatever seemingly odd idea he has, I bet it's going to work. And it virtually always does. He'll have some idea, some combination of instruments he wants to use that we might think, "What? What do you want to do? What do you do?" And then you play it, and it's great. He'll do it, and you go, "Oh yeah, okay." Thanks, Brian.
You rejoined Brian for his band after how many years it was since you last with the Beach Boys, in the 50th anniversary tour in 2016, if I'm not mistaken.
Uh-huh.
what was that like what was it like playing with him again after all those years since you last played with him?
Oh, it was fantastic. Well, I had been subbing into the band for the previous maybe 10, 12 years whenever somebody like Darian wasn't available because he had some other work going on.
Yeah.
So I was in and out of the band a lot through the previous years. Then I started back permanently, I think in late 2015. And it was great. The band is so good. The guys are so, so wonderful bunch of people. Great, great hang.
I'm curious on that situation because you mentioned that, and I've seen, I think David Beard post something on his Facebook of you, him, and Mike and Bruce backstage at one concert. How does that work when you're obviously you're not in the band, but you're subbing in for people? Is it who calls you up? Is it a middle person or is it someone else?
Who made those calls? Probably the manager, whoever the manager was. Now, was this a recent thing, like in the last year with Beard?
I think it was. I think it was within the last maybe year or so. It must have been a concert that was near you.
It was. I wasn't playing. They were near here in Ohio, and I went up there to see them. It was great to see them. Yeah.
For you to be back with Brian now the last few years, it must have been back to that boyhood, dream of playing with the Beach Boys and to finally, be with them for a long period of time.
Yeah. It's great full circle, and now I'm at the point in my life where this is like a really great gig to have at this point. So
when you joined them at that tour, that first tour in 2015 or 2016, they were doing their 50th anniversary for Pet Sounds. That in itself is a monumental album. That's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, besides maybe a Beatles album, if you want to be generous like that to the Beatles fans. When you're joining for that specific album, is that hard to compartmentalize or whatever the word is to make sure you're playing that album as well as it should be?
Oh, it was a challenge. Yeah, getting all those sounds right, getting those sounds, and there's a lot of work. And Darian Sahanaja had a lot to do with making sure I and everyone else in the band was playing what needed to be played. He's very good at that. So he kind of led me by the hand and showed me what I needed to play on the different keyboard parts and vibes and everything. It was a challenge, but God, I love doing it. Those songs, like you said, do I still love these songs? And we get in the middle of some of these songs and I go, God, I can't believe what I'm playing. These songs are so good. So good.
Even from a fan's perspective, I know Brian usually plays the same songs besides now when the box that was just released of Feel Flows and Sunflower, but even a song like Surfer Girl or God Only Knows, that you just sit back and it's like, even though this man's been playing it for 60 years, it's still as amazing as the early recording. Was there a song on that album when you joined them back that you found really difficult playing early on compared to the others?
When I first played with the group?
No, with Pet Sounds when you rejoined them a handful of years ago.
What was most difficult? They were all a challenge. None of them were difficult. It's just a matter of keeping your head on. I loved doing the two instrumentals. I loved Let's Go Away for a While.
Yeah.
And Pet Sounds itself. Let's Go Away for a While blows my mind. I mean, I don't know what to say. That's a great piece of music. But all of them, I just wasn't made for these times. Oh my God, what a song. What a song. They're all great.
You play, I forget who it was. I think it was Matt Coffey who had mentioned that Mike's band is more of a dance party atmosphere, and Brian's is sort of a slower down, sitting listening music. You played with both groups. How do you assess both groups now since you've played with them and have had so much experience with both?
Well, I think it probably just comes down to the fact that Mike is a lot more animated and he's a great stage performer, great showman, and Brian's very much inside himself and kind of quiet. And so that energy doesn't come physically from Brian, but the rest of the band is trying to do their best to keep it. But that's the big difference. Is he's very animated. He's still a great performer.
I'm sure, especially although Brian's only a short walk behind him at 80 years old, to still be able to crank out the songs and sing them so well as Mike does is impressive. I hope that one day I can be able to reach that level. But for you, when you were first joining out, as you mentioned, Brian relies on the band, Darian, and the rest of the guys and yourself to play the music. Was it hard for you to experience that when you joined back in 2015, or was it something that you were ready to take on?
Oh, I was ready. It was great. I hadn't lost a bit of enthusiasm for it, so it was wonderful to play those songs again. Even better than ever, I would have to say. Yeah. Partly because, well, a couple of things. I'm at the point in my life where I really, really appreciate being able to do this.
Yeah.
Where maybe when I was younger, I sort of took it for granted. I'm always going to have this, but you don't. And now to have it now, but just I'm going to really appreciate the songs and love them more than ever. So.
We had talked early on about playing with Chris Farmer, and then you play with him in Surf City All Stars. And I talked to Bobby about his group and how a lot of the guys in his group had played with the Beach Boys during the same time as he did, but then also after. For you in that situation where you're playing with Chris Farmer, who also played with the Beach Boys, and as well as maybe a few other members, is that, a moment where you sort of, take back and like, wow, this is how big this music is to, society itself, seeing is that all these former members are together?
Mm-hmm. It's great. Yeah, we all love playing together, just tapping into our common bond with the music. So it's a great thing. All the guys are keeping busy doing this stuff because the music is so popular that we can do it for all sorts of different venues and different events. So,
and I'm sure with the recent release of the box set, as well as what David Beer had done with the other guys, not with except with Brian, the Add Some Music to Your Day reissue, it definitely brings new life into the music. Like I mentioned, the 50th anniversary, you were parted with them. How surreal was that for you to see all the living members back together again, doing it all together again?
Yeah. Well, I went on stage with them a couple times, but just not as a permanent, not as a real member, just as they're playing in LA. So I went up, and it was quite a sight seeing everybody up there. Made me miss Carl and Dennis quite a bit. That was a big haul, but great to see. I'm glad that David Marks got to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And of course, Foskett was still working there.
Yeah.
And
helping Brian.
So it was very cool. Very cool. Brian seemed to be enjoying it.
Well, I can tell you, it looks like in some of the videos that he was enjoying, and he definitely was sounding very well, especially at that point. There's a song that he played on the tour. It wasn't on, I don't think it was a regular song on there, but it was a song from there. I think it was from their 79 album, the LA Light album, Good Timing, and he was singing it. And Al had come in and sang the, I forget what part of the song was, but I was taken aback each time listening to it because it's such a great song. To hear Brian sing it so well is definitely something. Speaking of the current times where we find ourselves in it, Brian, going back on tour, playing with Chicago, which I'm very curious about how that happened. Is there a song that you've played with him, or a song that you want to play with them that you haven't been able to play on the tour that you hope is added?
Added to Brian's set?
Yeah, that you like.
Oh God, there are tons. I couldn't even begin to tell you. There's so many. If I had my way and I could construct the whole set list, there'd be all kinds of stuff on there. But as it is, you can't do everything. Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But there are songs that would be great if the Chicago horn players would play with us, like "Darlin'," stuff like that.
Because they used to play during I think it was during the Beachago tour that they had.
Yeah, back in the 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what I really marveled at, and which I wanted to ask you about, is that when I went to go see Brian a second time in October, he was singing "Do You Want to Dance," Dennis's song, and then Al jumped in with him.
Yeah.
When they add that, whether it's Paul or Darren or Brian or whoever it is that makes the decision, when you see them add a song like that, which is something they haven't probably sung in a while, what's that like when you see him add a song to the song list like that?
Well, a song like that has been in and out of our set for years, but we always that song in particular we seem to forget about. So, I said, "What about Do You Want to Dance?" And everybody goes, "Oh yeah, that's a great one." So it'll get back in the set list for a while. So there's always songs that are in and out of the set, and that's one of them. It should be in.
From your perspective, you're not next to Brian, necessarily exactly next to Brian as maybe Darren or Al is, but when you're standing to the side and you're watching Brian sing that, do you have any idea what that's like for him to sing a song like that, especially when it's, sometimes hard for him to speak about his brothers?
I don't know. I don't know whether that crosses his mind at that point in the middle of a song. I don't know if he thinks about Dennis or if he thinks about Carl. I don't know. I hope he's just enjoying the moment and not, getting morose about it.
Of course, yeah.
I don't think about those guys, and I loved them, but I don't think about them then.
Yeah,
it's not the right place.
Al over the last few years, and I don't want to say the last few years, what am I saying? Since probably the beginning, his voice hasn't really changed at all since he first started. So now at this stage in his career, you play him, you know him. How do you explain how he's been able to sound this good, besides maybe the obvious choices of, as he says, staying clean with Al Jardine? How do you assess that with him?
I think that's it. In a nutshell, that's it. He's had a very healthy life, and his voice is fantastic. He hasn't lost a bit. He just sounds like an older version of himself. And he'll claim, "Oh, I can't hit that note. We can't do it in that key." There's no, Al, let's do it. And he hit the note. And, gosh, okay.
Is there a song that he has performed at the shows since you've been back that you enjoyed participating with him in?
Every song he sings, he nails. I mean, give me some titles. I'll tell you, they're all great.
Help Me Rhonda, obviously his classic one.
Well, yeah, I mean that's obvious.
Little Deuce Coupe.
Yeah, he does a great Little Deuce Coupe, of course.
Which and I want to say that when I first saw them, you guys, in January of 2 years ago, him singing Help Me Rhonda got me into the Today album, and all those songs from it. Do You Want to Dance? I believe is on there. And
yes, it is.
Rhonda. And I forget what else is on there. A few other Dennis songs, but a great album. And he's just so great. And what I like about him is that he's positive, and he also gives credit to Brian for what he's provided, but also not someone who's overly showboating about it or overtly praising about him too much, which also I think the band does in general, which I'm sure Brian appreciates it. Whether he says it frequently or not is another thing.
Yeah. No, he's very grateful to Brian for that, for all that he has.
Sorry, what? Sorry, I interrupted.
Just Brian's also very grateful to Al for still being there and still singing great.
Well, I'm sure it meant a lot to him after the 50th anniversary, where he went with Al and David and filled out the remaining engagements, and then they came back afterwards. As I mentioned, and you mentioned, we've talked about Gary, and you play next to him, and you've played next to him practically the entire time you've been back with Brian. Darren, I'm sure, has a lot of responsibilities with Brian, but also the band and making sure Brian's doing okay and cool. He's been there for so long, since the beginning, basically. What's that experience like playing next to Darren?
Oh, it's fantastic. He's so, I just admire. He's so good and so clear and so consistent, completely consistent. And he has a great relationship with Brian. He really does. They have a wonderful sort of bond. And he knows how to, get to Brian and get the most out of him. Get the absolute. Did you? I was the piano album that just came out.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to think of that at first when I just heard about it, because Darian had told me they were doing this. And well, is this? Well, I don't know what to think of this. And I heard it the other day, and I was so surprised that I was just completely moved by it, because it was just such a simple expression of how good these songs are. It's not jazz impressions of these songs. It's just, here are these songs played on the piano.
Yeah.
And I was just overwhelmed at, God, these chord changes and how great are these songs. I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
As I mentioned earlier, it's, as I said with Al, for even Brian to be able to play these songs, because sometimes, I'm sure he checks out sometimes when he's playing, but for him to be able to still play all these songs, and I know people online had I don't want to say gave him flack, but were getting upset because they weren't sure if it was him playing or not. But when I play God Only Knows from that album, I know every single, I don't want to say know every single lyric like yourself or someone out there who knows the song, but it's a great album, because I know that he's wanted to do like a rock and roll cover album he's been saying that for years, but to see him being productive again for this much is, still impressive. For you,
I know.
looking back on it, you've played with him on a few of his records. Is there
Mm-hmm.
one that sticks out to you that you enjoyed more than the other ones?
I did some on the Gershwin record, which I loved. I loved that. And on That Lucky Old Son, I did a little bit of, I think I played accordion on that. And what do I think? What am I missing? What am I missing?
Were you on the Disney album that he did?
Oh yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that actually, the genesis of that was out at my studio. Paul and Brian would come over and we would work on ideas for that record, listen to different Disney songs, and that's where that all started. So yeah, I loved doing that one. That was fun. That was fun.
When you did those three albums with, obviously that's, you know, three big projects, different music. Can you tell if I don't want to say his mood or, you know, his willingness to do it, but this is demeanor change when it's a different album, whether it's the genre or whatever they're trying to play? Since you've been with them?
He would really get into it. He was like the Gershwin. I remember when he first heard about the possibility of doing a Gershwin record, he was kind of like baffled by it. Said, they want me to do Gershwin music. I don't know if I can do this. And they would sit and think about it. Yeah, okay, I think I can do this. Yeah. Because he's all processing it in his mind. And on the Disney thing too, like I say, when he and Paul would come over and we were going through lists of titles to possibly consider to do, he would listen to it and he'd be very quiet. He'd go, no, I don't think I can do anything with that one. And another one, he'd hear a few seconds of it, he'd go, yeah, that's good. Let's do on that. Let's work on that one. You know, because it's all still there.
To be able to that quick to hear only a few seconds of a song. No, I can do some of this.
It was very cool. Very cool to witness his process, even at this point in his life.
You know, I'm not a musical genius. I'm more perfect, or not, I don't say perfect, more able to be sufficient on the athletic field or court. But man, I wish I had that talent. I want to mention that the Gershwin album briefly. Obviously, I know he likes that music, and that's sort of, I want to say, maybe his style more than maybe a Dennis who's more hard rock and roll. Mm-hmm. Was that an enjoyable experience, you think, from him to be able to accomplish all that was there? Because I know in interviews he really liked it.
Oh yeah. He was very proud of it. I played on, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 of the songs, and I just loved it. I was so honored to be part of it. I'd have to look at the credits again. I forget exactly how much I did on that, but I just know it was a great project. Everybody was, but obviously the material is as good as anything ever written. So, you know, it's pretty cool.
You mentioned that you played accordion on one of the albums. Obviously, you play, you know, the keyboard, and then the I forget the other instrument you play. I'm drawing a blank.
The vibes.
Yes, the vibes.
Yeah.
You're not playing the accordion at a Brian show. So how does that work when you're playing an instrument that you're not consistently playing on a tour?
Well, the accordion, I'm not a really skilled accordion player. It's a keyboard, and so I can kind of translate my piano skills to accordion, but I'm not fluid on it. You know, I watch great accordion players. I go, oh my God, that's incredible. I can't do that. But I was able to play what I needed to play efficiently. So that's the kind of player I am on the accordion. So as far as bringing it to the stage and playing live, it's just as easy to bring up a nice accordion sample on the keyboard and play it there.
Now, I'm curious about this. I saw videos from, it must have been late 80s tour, early 90s, or concerts with Jan Dean and playing the keyboard guitar. Can you still play the keyboard guitar?
I suppose I could. I think I still have one downstairs in the closet in my studio. I think I kept one. I beat the hell out of them, so I think one of them I had to just throw out. Wow. So that was fun. It was a fun period to play, to be able to get up and be mobile and play the keyboard. And I got fairly adept at it, I guess the word would be. It felt pretty comfortable. It's an odd thing because you're playing like this, which is not the way you're supposed to play. But it was fun. Fun time.
I mentioned, we talked about this before we got going, and mentioning it early on, recording the 60th, not 60th. Well, it is the 60th anniversary for the Beach Boys music and whatnot. And Brian's going out to tour. The group is with Chicago this summer for another time.
Yeah.
What are you expecting with this tour? Are you setting the bar high for yourself and the other guys?
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to set the bar high. We're going to, if this, knock on wood, if this all comes through, and everything's so strange out there right now that you can't count on anything.
Oh,
so
exactly. Yeah.
if it happens, we're going to put everything into it. Believe me.
Now,
Yeah.
how do you facilitate that, playing with Brian, someone you grew up idolizing, and then you're playing with another group as big as the Beach Boys Chicago on the same stage together?
I don't know. It's going to be quite an experience. I'm a big fan. I admire Chicago. They've had a great career and they have incredible records, and I can't wait to hear them play. And I hope we all get to play together on a song or two.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Now, I don't need any exact examples, because I'm sure you know more than me. If you had the opportunity and if it's available, would you play with them on stage for a song or two?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you could choose, what song would it be?
Oh gosh. Well, I hope we do "Wishing You Were Here."
Yeah.
I hope we do that and get to sing that with them. That would be awfully cool.
Yeah.
What's the other one? There's another song.
25, 6 or 4 or 20, whatever the.
Well, that's kind of guitarish,
Yeah.
Keyboard. They don't really need a keyboard. Another keyboard on that song. It would have to be something else.
Yeah.
They've had so many great ones.
Now, looking back at it all before we end and go into the one word challenge quickly, looking back at your historic career playing with the Beach Boys, Jan Dean, all this other amazing stuff, has it been exactly what you expected when you were a young child?
Oh, no way. I had no idea. If you'd have taken me aside when I was a kid and said, here's some of the stuff you're going to be doing in your life, I would say, are you serious? Really? Are you kidding me? Really? No, I would have been out of my mind, crazy, thrilled. Yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's been a wonderful thing.
Now, before we end here, and I let Gary get on his way, and I've had him a long time, I want to end with the segment called the one word challenge. So for those out there who don't know what it is, the one word challenge is when I take a few, 5 or 6 topics that have something to do with our guest being Gary Griffin today, and he has to do his best to say a word or two or sentence that best describes the word when he hears it. So, Mr. Gary, are you ready?
I hope so.
Lebanon, Ohio.
It's hometown-ish. It's not. I didn't grow up. Do you want me to elaborate, or just? I can just tell you, it's near where I grew up, so it's home. It's home.
Dean Torrance.
He's a buddy. He's a dear buddy, good friend.
Dennis Wilson.
Dennis Wilson was in a nutshell, he was one of the sweetest guys I've ever met, and one of the most troubled, just angst-ridden guys that I ever met. Sadly, and when he was sweet, nobody liked him. He was wonderful.
When you mentioned quickly that Brian, has this where he wants to do everything right then and there, and for this time, did Dennis sort of had that same thing when you were back then, or was that just not the case?
I didn't work in the studio with Dennis. I didn't work creatively with Dennis, only on stage. Okay. So I can't really say. I don't know what he would have been like to work with. I wish I had that opportunity, but I didn't.
Next one, keyboards.
Keyboards. It's my home. That's my thing. I've got a ton of them in the basement, in my studio. A ton of them, including I have the synthesizer. I bought it years ago from the Beach Boys. The synthesizer that Brian used on Beach Boys "Love You." Wow.
One of his favorite albums, he said, and you have
a
synthesizer. I'm sure you're never gonna let it go of that ever.
Well, I don't know. I might have to, sell it someday. Raise grocery money.
A heavy bargain, though. You're gonna want a lot of things in return for that, I'm sure, from that album. And certainly last, but certainly not least, Gary Griffin.
Oh God, what a fool. I don't know. That's tough, man. That's tough. I like the guy, and he drives me nuts. There are moments where I just like to beat the hell out of him. And most of the time I like him.
Well, Gary, I want to say sincerely, and I mentioned.
And I think my wife will agree. My wife will agree the same thing too.
Well, yeah. Gary, as I mentioned earlier, before we got going, I'll say it again. Thank you so much for doing this and coming on this week. It means a great deal. I truly mean it.
Well, thanks, Nolan. It was great. You conducted a wonderful interview.
Oh, thank you. And I want to say this briefly before I do my other plugging and whatnot. When I went to go see you in October, I believe you had gone on stage and tested a few keys out and a few other sound things out, and you're on stage. And I went to my dad and said, "Hey, you see that's Gary Griffin. He plays with Brian." And I was just saying, like, "Oh my gosh, there's Gary." And I think Paul, Probin had come out, and then I think Rob Bonfiglio came out, and I was like, "What is this? They're all coming out now." But no, if you like what you watched today, ladies and gentlemen, do us a favor, subscribe, like, comment, share, follow. Because 10 years from now, when this blows up like Joe Rogan, you look back on this episode, Gary, and say, "Holy shit, this was amazing."
That's right. Do as he says.
Yes, do it, or else me and Brian Wilson will come after you, and then Gary will come after you.
You don't want that. You don't want that.
You don't want Brian's 6'6" frame coming off the top rope on you.
No.
Gary, as I usually like to do, I usually let people take the floor on this one. Is there anything you'd like to plug or promote coming up, or that you have in the coming up right now?
Obviously, if you have the opportunity to see this Chicago and Brian Wilson tour in June and July, do it, because who knows how long we'll be able to do this.
Exactly.
So will we see you at any of those shows?
Now, as I mentioned, I live in Rhode Island, so not a whole lot comes there, but Massachusetts, the Xfinity Center in Mansfield, Mass is the closest spot. So I'm going to try to get there, push my dad into locking down on going there. But I'm going to try my best, because when are you going to see Chicago and Brian Wilson again? So
I know you got to go to it. Well, let me know if you're going to be there. We also have Long Island. That's not too far.
Yeah, my father will be driving, so I don't know if he's going to want to be driving out to Long Island for the music.
I'll talk to him. I'll talk.
Yeah,
to him. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, if you want all news and updates regarding to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, follow on Twitter, Nolan Carr at Night, on Instagram, Nolan Carr at Night, and in the words of Johnny Carson, I bid you all a heartfelt good night. Till we see each other again soon.